Perfect. So hello again, everyone. Thank you for coming out to today's partner session. We're super excited to have Eva-Lotta Lamm with us today, who will be teaching you how to use sketching to improve your design workflow. My name is
Hello,
Sarah.
everybody.
I'm Sarah Chisholm, a content marketer here at Shopify, and I'll be moderating today's session. For those of you having to cut out halfway through the presentation or your connection drops or anything like that, we'll be recording the webinar and providing everyone with a copy in about a week or two. Now on to our host. I'm proud to introduce Eva-Lotta Lamm. Eva is a user experience designer and illustrator and has held interaction design positions at companies like Google, Skype, and Yahoo. Most famously known for her engaging sketch notes, Eva speaks and teaches workshops about sketching and sketchnoting all around the world. We encourage you to sketch along throughout the presentation and share your final pieces on Twitter or Instagram using the hashtag ShopifyPartners and hashtag SketchAbit. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them throughout the presentation using the questions panel. We'll try to answer them near the end of the webinar. So we don't have any ideas for what people would like to learn how to sketch yet, but we'll keep the question panel open throughout the presentation just in case anyone has anything that they'd like to add. And now I'll hand the reins over to Eva, so just bear with me one moment.
So, question is, can everybody see my first slide, which is says sketching webinar?
Yes, we're good, Eva.
Okay, great. Well, thanks very much for having me, and thanks everybody for joining in and joining us for this little session for the next hour. I'm going to give a little intro about what I mean by sketching and how I use sketching and why I think it's important, and then we'll hopefully get to sketch a few simple things together so that we can all get started. And even if you think you're absolutely rubbish at sketching, that doesn't matter at all, because we're going to start really slowly and do some simple things that you can do straight away. All right. So this is me. My name is Eva-Lotta, as has already been said. If you want to find me on social media, my Twitter name and everybody else is Eva-Lottchen. I grew up in Germany. Work took me to Paris, where I lived for a few years, and then I moved to London, where I worked for companies like Google and Skype, doing mostly user experience design work. And in end of 2014, my boyfriend and I packed up our bags and were lucky enough to go traveling for a little bit longer than a year, just taking a break and looking at the world and how different people live in the world, and kind of broaden our horizons. But I wasn't completely lazy during that time, just traveling and having a good time. I used sketching during that time to document our journey. So I like to start with a few of these sketches because they put me in a good mood and they are an example of some of the work that I do, and I'm going to show a few more examples. So yeah, during our travels, basically, I spent about an hour and a half every day to kind of document the little moments and the people that we met, the food that we had, the animals we saw, and just all of the little things that happened throughout the journey, so that I could remember later on what we did and what we saw and what we learned. This is really nice. This is a really nice personal way of kind of sketching. This is probably much more familiar to most of you. This is what a lot of my sketching looked like all the years before. Using sketching to develop interface ideas and solutions. An example of a little wire flow here. More sketching of interfaces. Also doing it with other people in the room. So using sketching in a communal setting where you work together on finding solutions. And you might know me as well from the sketch notes that I take at different conferences. So the reason for that activity started when I started going to design conferences and web design conferences, and my memory is actually quite bad. So when I don't take any notes, I can't remember anything after a few days. So over the years, my note-taking grew more and more visual as I noticed that it would make me look back at my notes more often just because they were more fun and interesting to look at, but also by visualizing part of the content, I would remember more of the actual presentations. I made a few books out of the notes, collected them with all the notes of the different years, because I think it's quite a nice medium to have it back on paper and take the time to actually look at the stuff. I sometimes do these notes live on a big format. No pressure when you're standing there in front of a big wall and everybody can watch what you're doing in real time while people are speaking. And recently I started using an iPad and a pencil to do these notes digitally. What is really interesting about that for me as well, to look back at my own process, and this, I hope this works, it's a little video. So I can look back at my own process because the app that I'm using on the iPad actually records all the pen strokes that I do, and I can replay it as a little time-lapse video. And it is actually quite interesting as well for me to see in which order I do things. You know, towards the end I probably move around a few things because I have a better idea of the structure, and just to see how a sketch note like that is built over time. It is actually quite fun to see that. So that's one of the advantages of doing it digitally. I had the pleasure to also work with Rosenfeld Media on illustrating a couple of books. This is one that came out recently. It is about storytelling and how you can use storytelling to design products and to improve user experience. It's by Donna Litchell. I had the pleasure to work with Donna on her book about story mapping and about how we can use the traditional story arc of the tension rising and the hero journey to help us think through user experience problems and product design problems. So here are a few illustrations that I helped her to do for the book. So you can see you have the story arc and how that translates into different moments in the user journey when they discover a new product or use a product. And the idea was to do fairly simple diagrams with fairly simple icons that could also be then used by people to sketch these arcs and sketch these different moments, these little icons, for workshops that they do when they actually work through problems in a story way. And the last bit that I want to show from my work for now is another book that I worked with Rosenfeld Media on content strategy, and I did the illustrations for the opening chapters about each of the topics of the chapter. I did an illustration for, and although these illustrations are really worked up and they are not sketches anymore, they take a lot of time and revision to do the final illustrations. Sketching was super important in the process nevertheless, because they all start with simple sketches, trying to find metaphors for quite abstract concepts like turning content into content chunks, marking it up so that it becomes flexible, how pages and sites use APIs to retrieve content and all these kinds of things. So all of that started with simple sketches as well. So you can see I love pen and paper and I use it on a daily basis, and I sketch a lot to clarify my thoughts, to develop ideas, to communicate with other people. And I want to go a little bit into why I think sketching is such a powerful tool, especially for designers, but basically for everybody who needs to think and communicate, which probably includes all of us on this webinar. So why sketching? I want to start with looking at the world around us, and actually we are absolute experts in consuming visual information. So when we travel, for example, we consume visuals that help us get to where we need to get to. Continues in the airplane, more visuals that tell us what to do in an emergency, or probably you have had this situation as well when we have to build some furniture in our flat. We use visuals to help us guide us through the process. And the computers that we use, the desktop itself is a visual metaphor, and there are icons in abundance. So we use visuals to navigate both in the real world and in the virtual world every day. But when it comes to expressing ourselves in visuals and use visuals to communicate with other people on the fly, usually by sketching, there's a much different view. And in our society, it seems like sketching is acceptable either for children or for professional artists. But there doesn't seem to be much in between when we think about it. Either children sketch, and if we don't become a professional artist or maybe an architect that does it professionally for a job, we kind of stop sketching and don't look at all the things that are in between children's drawings and professional artists' drawings. But there's actually a lot of space and a lot of room to kind of use sketching to express yourself and communicate more clearly. I like to compare it to writing. We all learn how to write in school, and if we treated writing the same way we treat sketching these days, then we would tell people, well, now you know how to write, but the only thing you're allowed to write is kind of poems and high literature and Shakespeare quality theater plays and things like that. But actually we don't. A shopping list is a totally acceptable thing to use writing for in the everyday life to make your life easier. And the same is true for sketching as well. There's an equivalent to the shopping list with sketching as well, even if it's a very mundane sketch to help somebody to navigate the way around to where you live or to a place they want to go to. And I think we should leverage this much more. So this is us in the beginning. The first thing that we learn how to express ourselves is by talking. So we all learn speaking at the age of, I don't know, around 2. And the next thing that we learn is, for expressing ourselves, is learning how to write. And I suggest, and these are totally fine ways of expressing ourselves. They are really powerful. Language is great, don't get me wrong. But I just suggest that actually visualizing things and sketching things is like a third language, like a third layer of how you can express yourselves. And it is really powerful when used in combination with language and at the right point in the process. It can really help to express yourself. And so it's just a third additional layer that you can use. Sketches and sketching can make things more memorable, really. And this is why sketchnoting does work so well, not only because the sketches are more engaging to look at, but also because the act of sketching actually anchors things in your head much more. There's some interesting science if you want to look that up. It is called picture superiority effect, something that scientists found out when they looked at how we process visuals and words, and when we show people images and words, how much they can remember of each and what they can remember more of and for longer. And when we compare the two, visuals win. So when we show people images, they can remember more of the images than they can remember words. But actually, the clear winner out of the equation is actually when we combine the two together. When we use images combined with words and labels, that has the highest rate of memory. Um, Visuals are also great to give us an overview. This is a diagram I drew. This is basically a summary of Romeo and Juliet, of the story. And by outlining it in this visual, it actually becomes really easy to recall and retell the story. It's basically about these two families, the Montagues and the Capulets, fighting. And you can see with all the skulls, many people die. Almost everybody dies in the end. It gives a nice overview that makes it easy to recount the whole story. Visuals are also great to reveal patterns, to reveal things that we might not have seen before, and connections that we might not have noticed. This is a very simple example, a little text describing a company. There's a development team, there's a design team, some people work on an iPhone app together. And language is totally fine to describe this, but if we just take the time to sketch out a little diagram of what this looks like when we just visualize it, it becomes much easier to see at one glance how big the teams are, how they compare. They're pretty even in size, which is nice. We can directly see who's working together on the project and who's maybe not in the project yet. And it just becomes much easier to see the structure and to see a few things that we couldn't see immediately in the text. Visuals can also make a page really scannable, and that is by the way that our visual perception works. We are really good at looking at images and understanding images very, very fast, much faster than we can actually read words. This is an example how I use little icons in notes at work that I take. So this is an example from a user research session where we actually went into people's houses and interviewed them for 2 hours. We also had videos set up, but we supported that by taking notes to have instant access to some of the main points that people mentioned. And I set up a little library of very simple icons for myself to use in my notes. And you can see there's a lot of text written because I want to capture a lot of detail, what people are saying. But things like when there were really interesting direct quotes from people, I used these massive quote marks. If there was an idea that they had about how to improve the product, or I had an idea as a reaction to what they said, I sketched a little light bulb. There are these smiley faces and frowny faces for positive and negative experiences. And just by adding these little icons, it becomes really easy to go through the notes afterwards and just look through all the positive things or look through all the negative things or find all the problems, just because scanning the images is very, very fast. If you're interested in the science behind that or some recent findings, there's been a study in 2014 that looked at how quickly we can actually process images and understand concepts shown in the image. Something like what we're looking at, is it a picnic or is it a couple smiling or things like that. Scientists found out that the time that we need to recognize a concept in a visual is much shorter than they actually thought. It can be as fast as 13 milliseconds, which corresponds to about 75 concepts per second. So there's the name of the study in the bottom if you want to look that up and read more about it. It's very interesting stuff. Also, what I find is that showing visuals to people, especially diagrams and overviews and things like that, can be very, very engaging, because people look at the things, and there's an expression in the English language that we don't have in the German language, and I'm actually quite jealous of this expression. When people, when you try to explain something and they finally get what you mean, they go like, ah, I see what you mean. And this is actually exactly what we want. We want people to see what we mean and therefore we can actually show them what we mean, and not just tell them, but actually show them, so that they can literally see it, which I find is really powerful to get people's attention and to get their engagement. So you might ask, though, but what happens if I can't draw? I'm rubbish at that. It's actually not such a problem, because you can probably draw. You don't quite know it. You might not know it yet, or might have forgotten. But I've been talking about what I call the visuals being actually like a language, a visual language. And the hint is in the name. It is like a language. And I like to compare it to learning how to write. We all learned how to write. It's maybe a little bit uncomfortable and difficult in the beginning, but with practice we all got fairly efficient at it. And the same is kind of true with sketching and drawing, even in the structure. So it is a little bit like writing. In writing, we first learn letters, which are basically simple shapes made out of lines and curved lines. And in sketching, the letters, what I refer to as the letters, is fairly simple shapes, like a dot, a line, a triangle, a square or a rectangle, and a circle. So when we have these basic elements, we can make things out of them. So as an equivalent to words, when we take these simple shapes and put them together in different combinations like we would letters, we can create things, objects, which are like words, like a light bulb, for example. We can also take several of these things and put them together into expressions. For example, a good idea as opposed to a bad idea. So we can combine them. Or, for example, having an idea in the first place. So we can combine these simple images of things and people to create expressions. And when we have these expressions, we can combine them more with other expressions to make sentences. For example, having an idea about building a house. Or actually having the idea to build a tree house. So we can expand this system like we can expand language. And of course, we can make paragraphs and then also whole stories where we add several sentences together and give it a structure and tell the whole story about having the idea to build a tree house and actually planning it and going about it and realizing it. And it always starts with the first step. And because I already talked for a while, and now is actually the time for you to get active with me, we are gonna actually start and sketch a bit together. So for that, I am switching to Photoshop, where I'm going to draw for you. So I have got a tablet that is connected to my computer, so you can see that you will see when I draw, I hope. I hope everybody can see what I'm drawing. All right. So we're going to start really simply. And I said, as I said to you, if you want to grab a pen and a piece of paper, now is the time that you actually, if you want to, you can sketch along. So, as I said, all we need is knowing how to do a dot, a line, triangles, squares and rectangles, and circles. And maybe some squiggly lines, but I don't have to show you how to do a squiggly line. So if you can do these, you can do anything. Because sketching is actually like doing Lego. You take these simple shapes and you can put them together in different ways and make anything out of it. And I like to show this Lego theory of sketching I'll first demonstrate it by sketching something that is actually quite complex. a bicycle. A lot of people actually use bicycles every day. I ride my bike very often, but when we try to sketch a bike, it becomes actually quite complicated. It's like, there's this frame and somehow the wheels are attached, but I can't quite remember how it all fit together. But once you actually break it down into simple shapes, you will never forget how to sketch a bike. And we're going to start by this. All right, so if you want to sketch along, feel free. I'm going to go slow, step by step, explain what I'm doing, and you can sketch with me. So we're going to start with a triangle. Here we go. I'm going to make a triangle. It's a little bit slippery sketching on the tablet. You probably have an advantage sketching with a real pen on paper, but I hope it will be good enough. It's not about making something amazingly looking, it's about getting ideas across, so it's totally fine. Here we go, we have a triangle, and we're going to attach a second triangle to our triangle. So here we go, here's my second triangle, attaching it to my first triangle. You might already be able to see where we're going with this. All right, so the next thing we need is a line. It can be slightly bent if you like. It is almost like adding a third triangle there on the left, not quite, just one line. And now we're going to add in our friends the perfect circle. So one perfect circle goes here across around the front, and another one will go here around the back. So bear with me. This is going to be fiddly with my tablet to do it. To do a perfect circle. It is not completely perfect, but it is acceptable. So first circle and the second circle. Ooh, going around the back. Oh, this is a bad circle. But you get the gist. All right, here we go. And the last thing, we need a handlebar. So we need to be able to steer. And the last thing, we want to sit somewhere, so we can add a little line and a little oval for the saddle. Here we go. Here's my bicycle out of simple shapes. And what I usually do when I figure out how to sketch something, I then go take a piece of paper and I sketch it maybe 50 times in different sizes, just to kind of get used to the rhythm of sketching it, the order of sketching it, and getting it into my muscle memory of my hand. And when I did it 50 times, I will be able to sketch bicycles without even thinking about it. I go triangle, triangle, line, circle, circle, handlebar. Here we go. Also over time, I'll probably gonna get a little bit better and neater just because my hand warms up, like with all physical activity, also with sketching. We kind of need to groove ourselves in, you know, you're not going to win a 100-meter sprint without warming up beforehand, and the same is true for sketching. So you want to sketch the same thing over and over again, and kind of warm up your hand and put it into your muscle memory. Here we go. So this is one example. It's a fairly complex object, but if you break it down into simple shapes, it becomes actually really easy to sketch and available to you whenever you need it. I use sketching little icons like that extensively in my notes, as you saw in the user research notes, for example, or in my sketch notes when I work with people on the whiteboard. And I'm going to just show you a few of the icons that I use over and over when I work on the whiteboard that come in really handy for me. We'll start super simple. We'll start with a simple rectangle. Here we go, a rectangle. And when I have to follow up with somebody and send them an email and send a follow-up email, I'll do this rectangle little email icon, a V shape in it, and then two more angled lines that go into the corners. And this is my email icon for any time I need to follow up something with an email. If it's really urgent, you can put kind of 3 lines through it, and then makes the email even faster. So this is something I use all the time in my notes. Another thing that I use all the time in my notes, if there's an idea, if we have an idea or I have an idea about something, the international sign for idea, a light bulb. You don't have to be clever or super original. Going with convention is totally fine. So to sketch a light bulb, again, simple shapes. We'd start with a circle and add a little rectangle underneath. Here we go. Now the next thing we need is some lines, some 45-degree lines that go inside of the rectangle. That's where you screw in the light bulb. And now comes my favorite part, a little roller coaster. Ooh, 1, 2, 3. Here we go. A little roller coaster on the inside. You can do any kind of roller coaster. You could do a roller coaster like this as well. It's up to you. And last but not least, we can add a few lines around it to actually say the lights are on. There we have our icon for ideas. Sometimes when an idea is actually not that brilliant, it can kind of go wrong at some point. And actually using the same shape, so using the circle with the little rectangle at the bottom, you might actually see that if we add different shapes, so if we add 2 vertical lines in here and a horizontal line, and we add a little triangle, and then we add 2 black circles. Actually, sometimes things can end up in a conflict. So if things get really bad and really toxic, or you have to be really careful, I like to sketch a skull as a warning sign. A few other things, if it's about different team members, if it's about talking about different team members needing to take over different actions, if I want to capture that, a very simple way to draw a person is just to do an upside down U and close it with a line and add a little circle on top. Here we go. Here we have our person. So if John has to do a certain thing, I just put my little person icon. You can give a person eyes. It's always nice because they look in a direction and they look at you. Sometimes we have a whole team being responsible for something. So when I want to make a team, it is actually a few people. So I do 1, 2, 3 upside down U's. 2 people is actually pretty specific. 1 person is very specific. 2 people is very specific as a pair. If we want to say many, usually doing 3 actually says many. So I add 3 heads on top. So this is actually now this is my team. So if the A team has to solve the problem, here we go. That's the team. If the team is bigger, you can just add 2 more circles to it. That's a bigger team, or even 1 more. Here you go. So if the team is actually having a meeting, super simple way. If you want to sketch that you're having a meeting or that you need to schedule a meeting, basically you do the 3 upside down U's again, the 3 heads, and by adding an oval to the bottom, the table that the team sits round, you can add in some arms. You could put some rectangles in to show they have papers on the table. Super easy way to say we need to have a meeting. Very simple icon. A meeting usually can happen at milestones in a project, and a simple icon I use for indicating a milestone is making a little flag. So a simple way to do a flag is, again, by starting with a simple shape, a simple rectangle, and just adding a line to the left. and maybe a little line to say it stands on something. So it's a little bit of a boring flag. It is simple. It could be other things as well. So a very simple way to do a slightly fancier flag that actually looks more like a flag, which is not much more difficult than this, is instead of doing 2 horizontal lines, straight lines, I actually do 2 little wavy lines. So I do 1 wavy line, and I do a second parallel wavy line. And now I add the longer line, and I close it with vertical lines, and here we go. Same effort, much more amazing flag. It's actually moving in the wind. If you need another type of milestone, maybe a smaller milestone, you could also do a little triangular flag, just by having a line and adding a little triangle. And if you add a little circle around the bottom, it looks like it's kind of, you know, like a little golf flag coming out of a hole. Nice. Different type of milestone. Maybe this is a small milestone. This is a big milestone. So here we have milestones. The ultimate goal of having milestones is actually getting to the finish line and getting to the goal. And there I sometimes use flags as well. So if I go with my nice flag that is actually flowing in the wind like this, and then if I add a couple more parallel wavy lines to it and a few vertical lines down it, and then I fill out every other quadrant that I made, like a little checkered flag. You see where I'm going with this metaphor, like a racing metaphor. It is actually hitting the finish line. Maybe I add some little lines to say we're waving it, and this is kind of the finish line where we want to get to at the end of the project, our goal, where we want to get to. Nice little icon for that. If we have a target that we want to hit, we can also sketch a target by making a circle and putting a circle inside and another circle inside. So that's kind of our target. And when we want to show that we hit it, we just add a line from the center, from the bullseye, and add some angled lines to it. You can close it as well. This is kind of our arrow that is in the target. That is another one that I use on whiteboards a lot when we are talking about what are the targets or what is the target. All right. So this is actually starting to be a nice little visual vocabulary. So here we have conflict. That was our little skull on the top. Another one, when there's just a simple problem, not as bad as this guy. I do a flash like that for a problem, just doing a Z-shaped line together with a second Z-shaped line to indicate there's a problem. Really easy to spot. Sometimes if there's something important, I use the international sign for alert, which is a triangle with an exclamation mark in it that is very efficient as well to kind of see it and scan it in a sea of text. So yeah, these are some of the very simple icons that I use that are basically all made out of simple shapes. And I'm just going to, before we get into things that you might want to learn how to sketch and the questions and answers, I just go back to the presentation quickly and talk just a tiny bit about, if you don't do anything else, maybe 2 ideas of how you can apply this simple visual vocabulary in your work over the next few weeks if you want to start practicing this. So, as I said, I use it a lot in meeting notes. So if you write meeting notes by hand, if you just insert these little icons into the text, you might want to write in smaller chunks, and then next to the things put the icons for if you have a follow-up email, if you have an idea, if you have a question, if something is important. these are kind of some more of the icons that I use. So I use a simple star for an action item, maybe a checkbox for a decision. We went through the idea, question, a simple book if somebody mentions a book to reference. So in the presentation, you'll have this as well in the video, so you can look that up and maybe practice those. And the other that I mentioned is where this can be super handy is when you plan a project with a group and you go through like, yeah, this is our timeline and what do we need to do to get to the end. So you can talk about what are the milestones, what are the things to look out for, what are the deliverables, what are the meetings that we have to have. And just by adding these little icons, here are a few more. We went through a few of them. It becomes really visual for the group to see what the different milestones and points are on the project line. If you want to extend your visual vocabulary, I mean, we only practiced a few very simple icons. A very good way of doing that is just having a little doodle break every day, because you have to practice a bit, and practice makes perfect. And like when we learned how to write, you know, in the beginning it is awkward and it doesn't feel natural, but if you do it stuff over and over again, your hand will get used to it. So I like to sketch in the morning. When I have a coffee in the morning, the first 10 minutes when I sit down with my coffee, I actually have a piece of paper and I just doodle things. And I take actual objects that I see around me or that I find on the internet, pictures of objects, and I just try to break them down into simple shapes and basically take a sheet and doodle a few things. It is also quite relaxing, actually. If you have a stressful day at work and you just want to have a break from the brainy work, you know, have a coffee and doodle with your coffee. It is fantastic. It is very relaxing as well. You can choose a particular topic and think about all the objects around this topic. So this is a sheet that I did around cycling and thinking about what are all the objects around cycling, you know, like bicycles and races and air pumps and all these kinds of things. That's a good way of going through a topic. If you are really in a hurry, you can steal other people's visual metaphors, and the great website for that is the Noun Project, that actually collects icons for different concepts that people submit, and it's a fantastic visual resource anyway. And you can just type in a keyword and it shows you different icons, and usually because they are icons, they are fairly simple to sketch as well because they are reduced to simple shapes. So if you're in a hurry, then you can cheat a little bit by looking up other people's metaphors. I suggest, though, that you take the time to develop your own metaphors every now and then as well. You can also do a Google image search. Sometimes interesting things come up for that as well. It's probably slightly more cheesy and less visually refined than the Noun Project, but if you're stuck for ideas of how to visualize a concept, that can get you unstuck as well. You can also follow me on Instagram because I've shown you a few little icons, you know, step by step of using simple shapes and adding more shapes to build objects. And I'm actually doing a whole series. I think I have 50, 60, 70 of those little GIFs and videos on Instagram and on Twitter, where you can learn how to sketch very simple icons, a new one every day. So yeah, there's a whole lot already, a few of them. I've been going through the bicycle we did and the flag we did. So it's just step by step, follow along, and like that you can kind of build your visual vocabulary a little bit every day if you like. So I'll probably open it to questions now. If there are any questions or any requests for things to sketch that you never knew how to sketch, now is the perfect time to kind of ask these questions and ask to sketch different things if you want to know.
Excellent. So we have a question here. Going back to your design notes for your travels, I noticed that your information was organized a certain way. Do you have a template that you typically draw your notes in? or a specific order of information that you usually refer to?
All right. In general, I don't have a template. Like when I do sketch notes of talks uh, or of meetings or research sessions, I don't have a spatial template set up, just because the information can be so different and so varied that I don't know what's coming. So setting up a template beforehand usually doesn't work out. What does work out is trying to work with different visual hierarchy. So maybe having 3 different sizes you write in for titles and for important keywords, and then smaller writing for the details, and structuring it with icons, as I showed, just by adding it to the blocks of text. For my travel notes, it was slightly different because I kind of made myself a little template before we left, because I'm not really a story person or a story writer, and I didn't want to write, yeah, today I woke up and then I brushed my teeth and I had breakfast and then we went there. So, but rather than going linearly through the day, I wanted to collect little moments. I wanted to have a template that allowed me to collect little moments that I might not remember afterwards because they may be too small or not important enough to kind of be remembered in the broad story. So I had little prompts. I made a little book that had little prompts, like something I had to eat or drink, somebody I met or saw today, something that made me smile today, something I learned today. So these were just little prompts to help me collect moments throughout the day, and then I sketched them in the book, which was kind of fun because it also helped me to, it kind of steered my experience towards smaller moments and things that I noticed throughout the day.
Awesome. We have another question here from Brian. He's wondering, what is your process for sketching abstract ideas?
All right. That's a very interesting one. Thanks for the question, Brian. So if we talk about, real objects, like, I don't know, flags and light bulbs and things like that, this is fairly easy just to break it down into simple shapes. But if we talk about abstract concepts like, I don't know, accessibility or benefit or goal, these are things that don't have an image attached with them immediately. So it takes imagination to kind of find visual metaphors, and one way of approaching it, which is actually quite nice to ease yourself in, is not trying to start with the concept, but start the other way. So if you start by sketching out a whole range of simple objects, like find a list of words and then sketch out simple objects like, I don't know, a book and diamond and a light bulb and basically objects, and then go around afterwards and take all the objects and try to add abstract concepts that could be label them with abstract concepts that could be represented by these objects. For example, for a book, it could be the abstract concept of literacy, or it could be the abstract concept of knowledge or library. So there's several concepts that could fit this icon. So this is kind of an interesting way of reversing it to kind of start building your visual vocabulary, and then when you feel creative and are full of ideas by starting like that, you can also challenge yourself to maybe take one abstract concept a day and try to brainstorm different kind of images that could represent this concept.
That's a fantastic answer. We have another question from Derek. Derek is wondering if there is such thing as collaborative sketchnoting, and if so, how do you collaborate with someone else?
All right, that's a very interesting question. In my job as a UX designer, I've been doing a lot of collaborative sketching sessions with other people, like other designers, but also developers, product managers, researchers, to kind of come up with ideas for interfaces and kind of work on design solutions. Usually in these sessions, what is the collaborative part in these sessions is usually the talking about the sketches. The sketching itself, I like to, in these kind of sessions, I like to keep them as an individual exercise because everybody can actually express their ideas without having to justify them while they're still clarifying and expressing their ideas. So everybody sketches a range of ideas individually, and then you put it all on the wall and collect it and talk about it, and then you do another round of individual sketching. For sketchnoting, I have never tried to sketchnote actually with other people at the same time, but it might be a very interesting thing to just put out a big sheet of paper covering a whole table and then have everybody sketch and sketchnote while you're having a conversation, while you're explaining things to each other, and see what the final piece of paper actually looks like, and if this is something that actually captures the discussion that you had in a good way. It might be challenging because everybody has a different angle when you sit around a table. You could also try that collaboratively on the whiteboard. It might be something that I want to try out now that you asked the question.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So our next question comes from Anna, and Anna says, "Hi, thank you for sharing all of this. I love your notebooks. I have a Surface Book that I would love to use in this way. I was wondering what programs you recommend to sketch as apps or programs. I'm currently note-taking in Evernote, but maybe there's something you recommend more."
All right. So I don't have that much experience with taking notes digitally. As I said, I bought an iPad and an Apple Pencil, or whatever it's called, the thing that goes with it. And I've been using an app called Procreate for that, just because you can kind of control what the stroke looks like, because the brushes, you have fine settings on the brushes, and I tried out a few and I like this app, so I use that. I know that a lot of people also use a program called Paper by a company called 53. It's for the iPad as well, which is very simple. You know, you don't have many different tools, but often you get distracted by too many tools, so just having a very simple app is actually quite good. And I think one should probably just try out a few apps and then settle on one and try to really get used to it so that you can work fluently with it. I think the most important thing is that you choose one and then get really used to it, so that the tool actually almost goes away in your awareness, that you're not aware of the tool anymore because you know it so well, that you actually, because when we're sketching with pen on paper, we're not thinking about, oh, this is a pen and this is how a pen works and this is how I change color with a pen by picking up another pen. So the tool actually goes away, and you should get to the same point when sketching digitally, I think. So just pick one and use it so much that you feel at home in it.
Great. Following up to Anna's question, Ashley asks, what tools would you recommend or pens would you recommend using in real life sketching?
All right. I love this question. Usually it's the first question that people ask. It's like, any pen is better than no pen. So in the beginning, I would say don't worry about having the perfect pen. You know, it's just picking up any old pen. I would recommend using a pen and not a pencil. Or when you use a pencil, then don't use the eraser, because I think it is very healthy to kind of, when you make a line, not to try and erase, you know, and then fiddle about with it. But if a line is wrong, then you put a proper line on top of it. And if you can't see what you draw because you have too many lines on top of each other, you just do a new sketch. So I think it shouldn't be about, you know, editing and erasing all the time and being perfect. So having a pen that leaves a mark that you can't erase is a good start. And after a while, you will figure out which pens you like. You know, try out different things that you have or that lie around. I think what is important is you will notice that you have a certain size you're comfortable sketching in. And it's important to find the right thickness of pen for your comfort size of sketching. Some people sketch a bit bigger, and therefore you need a slightly thicker pen for the line to hold up nicely. I like drawing very, very small when I do my sketch notes, so I have an ultra thin pen that I really love. But there's no hard and fast rule for the best pens. Although if you really want to, you can go to my website. I'll give the URL at the end when we finish the questions. I wrote a blog post on my blog about my favorite pens, so there's a list of pens. But they are the ones I like, but there are so many wonderful pens out there. You should try them out and figure out what you like.
Excellent. Another question from Anna and a follow-up question to that from me. How do you keep all of your notes organized? And then on top of that, I'm wondering, do you resketch them after you finish sketching them if you decide that they're too messy, or do you keep everything just kind of organized by date?
Okay. Yeah. So when I do sketch notes from conferences, I have a sketchbook that they go in, and they are just organized by order, you know, like it's a book. So if one page is full, I start the next page, so they are all one after the other, and they are all in books. I usually scan them and just label the files with the date and the name of the conference or the event. So I have folders on my Mac that are just ordered by date, and so I can find and are labeled with the name of the event, so I can find stuff fairly easily. So that's how I keep them organized. Also, when I do sketches for projects that I do on paper, I usually do a big scan run every now and then. I usually sketch on, for projects, I sketch on loose A4 paper or letter-sized paper for Americans, and then I just, for each project, I run all the sketches through a scanner, usually a scanner that automatically pulls them in, so it's super fast. And then I have them in a labeled folder on my computer, so I have all the references. And to your question of reworking stuff, when I do sketch notes of conferences, I usually don't rework them. It's just how they are. That's how they come out. When I use the stuff for actually presenting back, for example, to my team, when I worked in a company and I went to a conference, I sometimes did present it back to my team about certain talks, and then I might take them into Photoshop and just pick out individual points that I wanted to talk about and put them individually on slides. So basically cut apart the sketch note to pull out different points. That works really well. So you can take the note and chop it apart and rearrange it if you want to use it for something particular. I have done that, but usually I just leave the notes as they are afterwards.
Excellent, thank you. We have a question from Brianna, and Brianna asks, I was so fascinated by that little dinosaur at the beginning of your presentation. Could you teach us how to draw a dinosaur?
I had a dinosaur in the beginning of the presentation?
Yes, I believe it was one of the first couple slides when you were showing how you helped illustrate a book.
Oh,
there was a little dinosaur.
Dragon.
Yes.
Okay. Let me this one, the little dragon there. I think that's the one she's referring to.
I think so too.
Okay, good. Let's draw a little dragon. All right. Here we go. Let me just close this and get rid of all this, and let's do a little dragon. Okay.
Awesome.
So how would I do a little dragon? I would start with a kind of head and neckline. So like it's kind of a wavy line, and then like a big mouth.
Awesome. As a follow-up to this, Roby is asking, with Photoshop, how do you add those nice shadings? So if we can add this to our little tutorial on how to draw a dragon, that would be fantastic.
All right. So here we go. Here we have the dragon. And then I know that and I know he's gonna have like little arms, so I draw the little arm here, and then here we go, and I need the leg, and then like this, and I know that they have a second leg, so I add this here, and kind of a second arm coming out here. And what is super important, like little triangles as teeth, so that he can actually scare people. And then that he looks even more scary, I want to have lots of triangles down his back so that he gets extra scary. His tail is pretty short now. I could have made the tail longer, you know, like this. Should have planned that before, but this is the little dragon. I think. There we go. I can cheat because I do have an eraser. Here we go. Here's my little dragon. And if he's really angry, he might actually spit some flames. Roar. Okay. And in the computer, how I add the shades, usually what I do when I work in Photoshop, I add a second layer. So I'm adding a layer here. I'll call it shadow. And I set it to multiply, and I set it to about 20%, so I can still sketch in black, but it comes out as a shadow. And I'm making my pen a little bit thicker now because I'm doing a shadow. Yeah, this is about right. And now I just run my brush at the bottom right edge of all the inside of my sketch. So all the bottom right edges, I just run the shadow along. There we go, maybe one around the eye, and then here on the right side of each of those. It's maybe a little bit thick. I could make it a little bit thinner. Here we go. I run the shadow always on the right and on the bottom. I get a nice shading because the idea is the light always comes from the same side. I assume it comes from the top left, so I want to have, if I have a box, for example, like this, or the idea is the light coming from the top left. Everything that is at the bottom and right side is darker. So that is kind of the idea why I run it along the bottom and the right. There's a little shadow on the box. Right. This is how I do shadows. Okay.
Perfect. I think that's all the time we have for questions today, but I really appreciate you joining us and giving us all this insight. Your little dragon's amazing. I'm sure I'll be using it in all of my sketchnoting from now on. I'm just going to take the screen back in one moment. I'll give everyone a chance to take down your URL and your Twitter handle just so they can contact you outside of the webinar if they would like to. And then I will change.
Okay, sorry to interrupt you.
No problem.
So actually, the first one is on sketchnotesbook.com. When you search in the blog, you will find the article about my favorite pens. That's kind of in the first URL and everything around the sketch notes. The second one is actually all my travel notes. You can virtually follow around my trip around the world. Every day I'll post a new sketch from the trip that is actually 2 years after it happened. We started traveling on the 25th of September 2 years ago. So if you follow there, you will have a new sketch note from the trip every day. And then the last one is I mentioned, or I'm going to write a book about how to use sketching in the design process for sketching interfaces and apps and stuff. If you want to be in the loop when this is going to be ready, you can do that. That's it. These are the three.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing those. So I'm just going to take the screen back. Just give me 1 second. Awesome. So thank you so much for joining us today, Eva. I understand that you're going to be really busy in the upcoming month, and we really appreciate the time that you spent here with us today. I just want to let all of our attendees know that our next webinar will be with Chris Coyer, and it'll be about the 10 things you can and should do with SVG files. Chris is a web designer and developer at CodePen, an author of a book of parts practical SVG, and a frequent contributor to CSS tricks. Registration is now open for that one. You can check it out at the partner's new webinar page and register. Just go to our blog and you'll be able to find that there. Thanks again, everyone, and have a wonderful rest of your day. We're looking forward to seeing all of your lovely sketches on Twitter and Instagram. Again, if you've been following along, if you could snap a picture of your sketches and hashtag Shopify Partners and hashtag Sketchabit, that'd be fantastic. Thank you so much again, Eva. We hope you have a great afternoon.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, and happy sketching, everybody.
Awesome. Happy sketching.